I exposed my fiancé's cheating in front of 200+ guests before our wedding. Before I dive into this story, I need to get something off my chest. If you're reading this, chances are you've experienced betrayal in some form. Maybe not as dramatic as mine, but the sting is universal. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who hurt us deepest. This is about the day my world shattered, the secrets that came tumbling out like dominoes, and how I discovered that the man I was about to marry had been living an entire double life that went far beyond simple infidelity. I'm Elena, 29, and I work as a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital. 3 years ago, I thought I had life figured out. I was engaged to Henry, a 32-year-old construction foreman who owned his own company. We'd been together for 4 years, engaged for 8 months, and our wedding was just 2 weeks away. Our invitations had gone out, the church was booked, and I'd spent countless evenings addressing thank you cards for gifts that had already started arriving. Henry was everything I thought I wanted. Tall, ruggedly handsome with calloused hands that told stories of honest work. He'd built his construction business from nothing, starting with just a pickup truck and a toolbox his father had left him. I'd watched him work 12-hour days to provide for us, admired his determination to create something from scratch. We'd bought a house together in the suburbs, a 1950s colonial that he was slowly renovating room by room. I loved watching him work with his hands, seeing his vision come to life in crown molding and hardwood floors. But somewhere along the way, the man I fell in love with started disappearing. The changes began about 8 months ago, right around the time he landed what he called the biggest contract of his career, a luxury housing development on the outskirts of town. Suddenly, Henry was working even longer hours, often not coming home until after 11 p.m. When I questioned it, he'd wrap his arms around me and say, "We're building our future, babe. This contract is going to set us up for life." I believed him because I wanted to. Because nurses don't make the kind of money that would allow us to dream of the life he painted. Vacations in Europe, a bigger house, maybe me cutting back to part-time when we had kids. His late nights were an investment in our dreams. Our conversations became shorter, more functional. Instead of talking about our hopes for the future, we discussed grocery lists and wedding seating arrangements. When I tried to bring up my concerns about how disconnected we'd become, he'd deflect with jokes or promises that things would slow down after the wedding and honeymoon. "Just let me finish this project, Elena. Then we'll have all the time in the world." The red flags I ignored were glaring in hindsight. Phone calls he'd taken another room, always claiming it was business stuff that would bore me. Sudden weekend trips to check on materials, or meet with suppliers, that came up at the last minute. The way he'd subtly angle his phone screen away from me when texting. New cologne that smelled expensive. Clothes that seemed too nice for construction work. But the worst part was how he'd started treating me differently in bed. Where there used to be passion and presence, there was now a mechanical quality, like he was going through the motions. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at the ceiling afterward, lost in thoughts he never shared. When I asked if everything was okay, he'd say he was just tired from work. I convinced myself it was pre-wedding stress. Every engaged couple went through rough patches, right? My friends who were married assured me that the period before the wedding was always chaotic and stressful. "It'll all go back to normal after the honeymoon," my maid of honor Jasmine promised. But deep down, in that place where women's intuition lives, I knew something was fundamentally wrong. I just didn't know how wrong. 2 weeks before our wedding, I decided to surprise him at his current job site. I'd gotten off work early after a particularly difficult shift in the pediatric ICU. We'd lost a 7-year-old to leukemia, and I was emotionally drained. I needed to see Henry, to remember why I was fighting so hard to build a life with someone. I picked up his favorite Italian sub from Tony's Deli and drove toward the construction site, looking forward to seeing his face light up when I showed up unexpectedly. The Willowbrook development was a sprawling complex of luxury homes about 25 minutes from our place. I'd never visited this particular site, though Henry talked about it constantly. He described it as his masterpiece, custom homes starting at $800,000, the kind of project that would establish his company as a major player in the market. I parked near the construction trailer and walked around looking for Henry's familiar red Silverado with Donnelly Construction emblazoned on the side. The main work area was bustling with activity, but I didn't see him among the workers laying foundation or framing walls. That's when I spotted his truck parked behind one of the nearly completed houses, tucked away from the main thoroughfare where casual visitors wouldn't see it. The house itself was stunning, A modern farmhouse with clean lines and huge windows that would offer incredible views once the landscaping was complete. I approached the house, planning to call out to Henry, but something made me hesitate. Maybe it was the way his truck was positioned, almost hidden. Maybe it was the silence from inside a house where I expected to hear construction noise. Or maybe it was that woman's intuition finally demanding to be heard. Instead of knocking, I walked around to the side of the house where those large windows offered a clear view into what would be the living room. And that's when I saw them. Henry and a woman I'd never seen before, locked in an embrace that left no room for misinterpretation. But this wasn't just a kiss. It was the kind of intimate moment between two people who were completely comfortable with each other. She was sitting on a makeshift table, her legs wrapped around his waist, her fingers tangled in his hair. He was holding her face in his hands, kissing her with a passion I hadn't seen from him in months. The Italian sub fell from my hands, hitting the ground with a soft thud that neither of them heard. I stood there frozen, watching my fiancé make love to another woman in a house that suddenly felt like a shrine to their relationship rather than his professional achievement. The woman was petite with auburn hair that caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. She was wearing a cream-colored sundress that looked expensive, definitely not construction site attire. She looked comfortable in the space, familiar with it, like she belonged there. As I watched, Henry lifted her off the table and carried her toward what I assumed was the master bedroom. They were laughing, completely absorbed in each other, oblivious to the world outside their bubble of deception. I backed away slowly, afraid that any sudden movement might shatter the surreal quality of what I was witnessing and force me to confront a reality I wasn't ready to face. My mind raced through every possible explanation. Maybe it was a client, maybe it was innocent, maybe I was misunderstanding what I was seeing. But deep down I knew. This explained everything. The late nights, the distance, the secretive phone calls, the way he'd been treating me like a roommate rather than a lover. This woman wasn't a mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment. She was the reason my relationship had been dying a slow death for months. I made it to my car before the tears came. Sitting in that parking lot, surrounded by the sounds of construction and progress, I felt my entire world crumbling. In 2 weeks, I was supposed to walk down the aisle in a dress that had cost more than I made in a month. Our families had already started arriving from out of town. The reception venue was paid for, the flowers ordered, the photographer booked. But more than the logistics, I was mourning the death of the man I thought I knew. Henry had been my safe harbor, the steady presence in my life of chaos and heartbreak, because working pediatric oncology means watching children die, means holding parents as they receive the worst news of their lives. I'd thought Henry understood that burden, that he was my refuge from a world that could be cruel and unpredictable. Now I realized he'd been adding to that cruelty in the most personal way possible. The drive home was a blur of tears and rage. I kept replaying the scene, hoping I'd misunderstood, hoping there was some innocent explanation. But the way he'd held her, the practiced intimacy of their interaction, the fact that he'd brought her to what was supposed to be his professional project, there was no mistaking what I'd witnessed. At home, I sat in our living room surrounded by wedding preparations that now felt like elaborate props in a play where I was the only one who didn't know the script. Thank you cards I'd been addressing were scattered across the coffee table. My wedding dress hung in its protective bag on the bedroom door. Centerpieces I'd spent weekends crafting with my mother and Jasmine lined the dining room table, each one a testament to how invested I'd been in a future that was apparently fiction. I needed answers, but I also needed to be smart about how I got them. So instead of confronting Henry immediately, I decided to do some detective work. I started with his laptop, which he'd left on the kitchen counter, something that should have been a red flag in itself, since he'd become increasingly protective of his devices. His email was open, and what I found there made my discovery at the construction site look like a minor betrayal. The woman's name was Janet Chen, and she wasn't just some random person Henry had gotten involved with. She was the lead architect on the Willowbrook development project. But more than that, she was his business partner in ways I'd never known existed. Email after email revealed a complex web of lies that went far beyond infidelity. Henry and Janet had formed a limited partnership for the development project, something he'd never mentioned to me despite the fact that we'd supposedly been building a life together. They'd taken out business loans together, purchased property together, and were planning to expand their partnership to additional developments across the state. But the emails that really destroyed me were the personal ones mixed in with the business correspondence. Messages talking about their future, about the house they were planning to build together once the development was complete, about how difficult it was to maintain his relationship with me while building something real with her. In one particularly devastating exchange from 3 months ago, Janet had written, "I know this is hard, but you need to end things with Elena soon. We can't keep building our life together while you're still playing house with her. It's not fair to any of us." Henry had responded, I know. After the wedding, I'll figure out how to extract myself without causing too much damage. The house is in both our names, and she's been contributing to the business more than she knows. I need to be strategic about this. Extract himself. Like I was a splinter he needed to remove carefully to avoid infection. I kept reading, discovering layer after layer of deception. Henry had been using money from our joint savings account, money I'd contributed from my nursing salary, to fund his business ventures with Janet. The business trips he'd been taking weren't to meet with suppliers or check on materials. They were romantic getaways to plan their future together. The most crushing revelation came in an email chain from just last week, days after our final dress fitting, days after I'd given my final head count to the caterer. "Are you really going through with the wedding?" Janet had asked. "It's complicated," Henry had replied. "Elena's family has already spent a lot of money, and calling it off now would cause a huge scene. I'm thinking I can go through with it, then we can figure out an exit strategy afterward. Maybe suggest couples counseling first, then a amicable separation. That way I don't look like the bad guy, and we can protect our business interests. Go through with it." He was planning to marry me knowing full well that he intended to leave me afterward. I would have become his wife in name only, a legal arrangement designed to protect his reputation while he built a life with someone else. My hands were shaking as I printed out the most damaging emails. Part of me wanted to stop reading, to preserve some small piece of my illusion that the man I'd loved for 4 years had at least cared about me. But I needed to know the full scope of what I was dealing with. The final blow came when I found their shared photo album, hundreds of pictures chronicling a relationship that had been growing alongside ours for over a year. Photos at restaurants I recognized, places Henry had claimed to be meeting clients or suppliers. Pictures of them at what was clearly a weekend getaway to Napa Valley, the same weekend Henry had told me he was visiting a lumber supplier in Sacramento. There were photos of Janet wearing jewelry I didn't recognize, including a necklace that looked suspiciously like one I'd admired at a boutique downtown. Henry had told me it was too expensive when I'd pointed it out, but apparently not too expensive for his real girlfriend. The most painful image was a picture of them at what looked like a real estate office, both holding champagne glasses and smiling at the camera. The caption read, "Officially purchased our dream lot today. Can't wait to build our forever home. Red heart, our dream lot." While I'd been planning our wedding, Henry had been purchasing property with another woman to build their forever home. By the time Henry came home that evening, I had printed copies of every damaging email, screenshot every revealing photo, and compiled a dossier of evidence that painted a clear picture of systematic deception that went far beyond simple infidelity. He walked through the door at his usual late hour, looking tired but oddly content. He kissed my forehead, the same casual kiss he'd given me for months, the one I now realized was nothing more than muscle memory. "How was your day, babe?" he asked, grabbing a beer from the fridge and settling into his recliner to watch SportsCenter. I watched him perform this routine, our routine, and marveled at how easily he slipped into the role of devoted fiancé. How long had he been living this double life? How had I been so blind to the signs that now seemed obvious? "The Willowbrook project is really coming along," I said casually, testing the waters. "Yeah, it's been a challenge, but we're making good progress," he replied, not looking away from the TV. "I heard Janet Chen is the architect. That must be nice, working with someone so talented." For just a moment, his body tensed. It was subtle, a slight pause in reaching for his beer, but I caught it. "She's very good at what she does," he said carefully. "Very professional." Professional, right? I was thinking maybe I could visit the site sometime, see your masterpiece in progress. "Oh, it's not really safe for civilians right now. Lots of heavy machinery, loose materials. Maybe after we get back from the honeymoon." Another lie delivered so smoothly that if I hadn't seen the evidence with my own eyes, I might have believed it. I excused myself to go take a shower, but instead I sat on our bed and called Jasmine. "I need you to come over," I told her without preamble. "And bring wine. A lot of wine." "What's wrong? You sound weird." "Henry is cheating on me. With his business partner." And they've been planning to divorce me after the wedding. There was silence on the other end of the line, then Jasmine's voice, sharp with anger. I'm on my way. Don't say anything to him until I get there. While I waited for Jasmine, I sat in our bedroom, the room Henry had remodeled with his own hands, installing built-in bookshelves and crown molding, and tried to process the magnitude of what I discovered. This wasn't just about infidelity. This was about a man who had been systematically planning to destroy my life while convincing me to build one with him. He'd let me contribute to business ventures I knew nothing about. He'd let me plan a wedding he had no intention of honoring. He'd let me believe in a future he was actively working to undermine. Jasmine arrived within 30 minutes, carrying 2 bottles of wine and wearing the expression of someone ready for war. "Show me everything," she said simply. I spread the printed emails across our dining room table like evidence in a criminal case. Jasmine read in silence, her expression growing darker with each revelation. "This is so much worse than cheating," she said finally. "This is fraud. He's been stealing from you, lying to you, and planning to abandon you while making you complicit in your own destruction." "What do?" I asked, feeling smaller than I had since I was a child. "First, we make sure he can't take you down with him. Then we make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man Henry Donnelly really is." That night, while Henry slept peacefully beside me, probably dreaming about his future with Janet, Jasmine and I developed a plan that would expose not just his infidelity, but the full scope of his deception. Because if Henry thought he could use me as a convenient cover while building a life with someone else, he was about to learn that the sweet, trusting nurse he'd been manipulating had a backbone made of steel. The wedding was off, but the real show was just beginning. Update. What followed was the most difficult and liberating 2 weeks of my life. But before I tell you about my revenge, and it was revenge, carefully planned and devastating in its completeness, you need to understand that this wasn't about jealousy or hurt feelings. This was about justice for a level of betrayal that went far beyond anything I could have imagined. The next morning, after Henry left for what I now knew was probably a breakfast date with Janet, I made a series of phone calls that would change both of our lives forever. First, I called our bank to inquire about recent transactions on our joint accounts. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Over the past 8 months, Henry had transferred nearly $35,000 from our joint savings to a business account I'd never heard of. Money I'd contributed for my nursing salary, money we'd saved for our future home renovations and eventual family, had been funding his secret business ventures with his girlfriend. Next, I called my father, who happened to be a retired police detective. I needed to understand the legal implications of what Henry had done, whether his actions constituted fraud or theft. "Elena," my father said after I'd explained the situation, "what you're describing is financial abuse at minimum, possibly criminal fraud depending on how the business accounts were set up. You need to document everything and contact a lawyer immediately." My third call was to Sarah Martinez, a divorce attorney recommended by one of the doctors at the hospital. Even though Henry and I weren't married, we had significant financial entanglements that would require legal expertise to untangle. "This is a complex case," Sarah told me after I'd emailed her the evidence I'd compiled. "The good news is that his own communications provide a clear paper trail of intent to defraud. We can not only protect your assets but potentially pursue criminal charges if you choose to go that route." But the call that changed everything was the one I made to my cousin Rebecca, who worked in marketing for the local Chamber of Commerce. Rebecca had always been the family gossip, but she was also well connected in the business community. "Becky," I said, "I need a favor, and it's going to sound crazy. I'm listening. I need you to help me destroy Henry's reputation so thoroughly that he'll never work in this town again." There was pause, then, "What did that bastard do?" By noon, I had assembled a team of women who were ready to help me execute what would become known in our social circle as the wedding that exposed everything. Instead of canceling the wedding, I decided to let it proceed, with some modifications that Henry wouldn't discover until it was too late. See, I'd realized something important. Henry was planning to use our wedding as the ultimate cover for his deception. He'd go through with the ceremony to maintain his reputation, then slowly extract himself afterward while keeping his business relationship with Janet intact. In his mind, he'd look like a man who'd tried to make his marriage work rather than someone who'd been living a double life. But what if, instead of being his cover story, our wedding became his public exposure? I spent the next week in a state of controlled fury, playing the role of excited bride while secretly orchestrating Henry's downfall. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal, accepting his casual affections and lies while planning his complete humiliation. 3 days before the wedding, I received the final piece of evidence I needed. Sarah's private investigator had been following Henry and had obtained photographs of him and Janet at what appeared to be their own private ceremony, exchanging rings at a romantic restaurant, complete with a photographer who'd clearly been hired for the occasion. They'd essentially gotten engaged while he was engaged to me. That's when I knew exactly how I was going to handle the wedding day. I called the pastor of our church, Reverend Williams, and requested a private meeting. "I need to tell you something about Henry," I said, spreading the evidence across his desk. "And I need your help with something that's going to sound unconventional." Reverend Williams had married my parents and had known me since I was a child. After reading through the emails and seeing the photographs, his face hardened in a way I'd never seen. "Elena, I cannot in good conscience marry you to this man," he said. "I'm not asking you to," I replied. "But I am asking you to help me make sure everyone knows exactly who they're really dealing with." The wedding day arrived with perfect weather, sunny skies and a gentle breeze that rustled the flowers in the church courtyard. Guests began arriving at 2 p.m. for the 3 p.m. ceremony. Henry's family had driven in from Ohio, my extended family had flown in from Oregon and Washington, and nearly 200 friends and colleagues filled the pews of St. Mary's Catholic Church. Henry looked handsome in his black tuxedo, greeting guests and playing the role of nervous but excited groom. I watched him from the bridal suite, amazed at his performance. Even knowing what I knew, seeing all the evidence I'd compiled, part of me could almost believe he was genuinely happy to be marrying me. My bridesmaids, Jasmine, my sister Katie, and 2 friends from nursing school, helped me into my dress. It was a stunning creation of ivory silk and French lace that had cost $3,500 and fit like it had been painted on my body. As they fastened the buttons and arranged my veil, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I looked like a bride who was about to have the happiest day of her life. In a way, I suppose I was. At 2:55 p.m., the wedding march began playing. My father offered me his arm, his expression grim because I'd told him and my mother the full truth the night before. "Are you sure about this, sweetheart?" he whispered as we positioned ourselves at the back of the church. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I replied. The church doors opened, and every head turned to watch me make my entrance. Henry stood at the altar, his face lighting up when he saw me. For a moment, he looked like the man I'd fallen in love with 4 years ago. Genuine joy in his eyes, a smile that seemed to come from his soul. I walked down that aisle with my head held high, carrying a bouquet of white roses that concealed a small wireless microphone connected to the church's sound system. When I reached the altar, Henry took my hand and whispered, "You look incredible." "Thank you," I whispered back. "I hope you're ready for this." Reverend Williams opened his Bible and began the ceremony with traditional words about the sacred nature of marriage, the importance of honesty and fidelity, the commitment to forsake all others. I watched Henry's face as these words washed over him, wondering if he felt even a flicker of guilt or self-awareness. When we reached the part where Reverend Williams asked if anyone had any reason why Henry and I should not be joined in marriage, I stepped forward. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the church's sound system, "I have something to say." A murmur went through the congregation. Henry looked confused but smiled indulgently, probably thinking I was about to make some sweet declaration of love. Instead, I reached into my bouquet and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Henry," I said, looking directly into his eyes, "2 weeks ago I discovered that you've been having an affair with Janet Chen, your business partner. But that's not all I discovered." His face went white. The church fell completely silent. "I found emails between the 2 of you planning our divorce before we were even married. I found evidence that you've been stealing money from our joint accounts to fund business ventures with her. I found photos of you 2 at what appears to be your own engagement celebration." I unfolded the paper and began reading directly from his emails, his own words condemning him in front of everyone who mattered in both of our lives. From Henry Donnelly to Janet Chen, dated 2 weeks ago, Elena's family has already spent a lot of money, and calling it off now would cause a huge scene. I'm thinking I can go through with it, then we can figure out an exit strategy afterward. Maybe suggest couples counseling first, then an amicable separation. That way I don't look like the bad guy, and we can protect our business interests. The gasps from the congregation were audible. I could see Henry's mother covering her mouth in horror, my own parents looking at him with disgust, our friends and colleagues realizing they were witnessing something unprecedented. But I wasn't done. From Henry to Janet, dated 3 months ago, "I know this is complicated, but what Elena doesn't know won't hurt her. The money she's contributing is helping us build something amazing together. Once we're established, we can figure out how to extract me from this situation without damaging our business partnership. Elena, stop, Henry said, his voice barely above a whisper. Please, why should I stop? I asked, my voice getting stronger. You didn't stop when you were planning to commit fraud. You didn't stop when you were stealing from me. You didn't stop when you were planning to use this sacred ceremony as a cover for your deception. I turned to face our guests, many of whom were clients or potential clients of Henry's construction business. Henry Donnelly is not just a cheater, I announced. He's a liar and a thief who has been systematically defrauding me while planning to abandon me after using this wedding as a reputation management strategy. The silence in the church was deafening. Henry tried to grab my arm, but I stepped away from him. The wedding is obviously off, I continued. But I wanted all of you to know exactly who you've been trusting with your business, your friendships, and your respect. Then I did something that surprised even me. I pulled off my engagement ring and placed it on the altar. Henry, I hope Janet Chan is worth losing everything, because that's exactly what you're about to do. With that, I gathered my dress and walked back down the aisle, leaving Henry standing alone at the altar in front of 200 witnesses to his character. The reception hall had already been paid for, so I invited everyone to join me for what I called a celebration of truth and new beginnings. About 3/4 of the guests showed up, including Henry's own family members who came to apologize to me and my parents. His mother, Carol, approached me with tears in her eyes. Elena, I am so ashamed, she said. I raised him better than this. I don't know what happened to the son I thought I knew. Neither do I replied honestly. But at least now we all know who he really is. The aftermath was swift and devastating for Henry. By Monday morning, 3 of his major clients had canceled their contracts. The Willowbrook Development Partners conducted an emergency review of the project and discovered financial irregularities that led to Henry and Janet being removed from the project entirely. The story of our wedding day spread through social media and local business networks like wildfire. Henry called me repeatedly, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. Elena, please, we need to talk. I know what I did was wrong, but destroying my business isn't going to fix anything. There has to be a way we can work this out. But there was nothing to work out. I'd already filed a civil suit to recover the money he'd stolen from our joint accounts. The criminal investigation Sarah had initiated was moving forward. And Henry's reputation in the construction industry was essentially finished. The house we'd shared went on the market immediately. I moved in with my parents temporarily while I figured out my next steps. The wedding gifts were returned to guests along with handwritten notes explaining the situation and thanking them for their support. 6 months later, I received news that Henry had filed for bankruptcy and was moving to another state to start over. Janet had apparently ended their relationship once the financial scandal broke, choosing to distance herself from the wreckage of his reputation rather than weather the storm with him. A year after that disaster of a wedding day, I ran into Henry's cousin at the grocery store. She told me that Henry had reached out to apologize to his family for the embarrassment he'd caused and had asked her to pass along a message if she ever saw me. He wanted me to tell you that he knows he destroyed the best thing in his life, and he's sorry for everything he put you through. I appreciate that, I told her. But I hope he understands that sorry doesn't undo the damage. 2 years later, I met Jonathan, a pediatric surgeon at the hospital where I work. He was recently divorced, honest about his past mistakes, and refreshingly straightforward about his intentions. When he asked me to dinner, he did it directly. When he said he'd call, he called. When he introduced me to his colleagues and friends, I was clearly and proudly identified as his girlfriend. The contrast with Henry was stark and healing. Jonathan didn't make me guess about my place in his life or wonder if he was hiding parts of himself from me. Our relationship was built on a foundation of transparency that I'd never experienced before. We've been together for 18 months now, and while we're talking about marriage, we're taking our time. I've learned that rushing into legal and financial entanglements with someone is dangerous, and Jonathan understands that my caution comes from hard-earned wisdom rather than a lack of commitment to him. Sometimes people ask if I regret how I handled the situation with Henry. Some say I was too harsh, that I could have simply called off the wedding and moved on without destroying his life. But here's what those people don't understand. Henry didn't just cheat on me. He committed fraud. He stole money from me to fund his relationship with another woman. He planned to use our wedding as a strategic cover for his deception, then divorce me afterward while protecting his business interests. More than that, he was willing to let me stand in a church and make sacred vows that he had no intention of keeping, knowing full well that he intended to abandon me as soon as it was convenient. The public humiliation he experienced was simply the natural consequence of his actions becoming known. I didn't destroy Henry's life, I just refused to keep his secrets for him. The woman who almost married Henry Donnelly thought love meant protecting someone even when they were hurting you. The woman I've become understands that real love requires honesty, respect, and the courage to hold people accountable for their choices. That $3,500 wedding dress is hanging in my closet, still in perfect condition. Sometimes I look at it and remember the naive woman who wore it thinking she was about to marry the love of her life. Then I remember the strength it took to stand at that altar and choose truth over comfortable lies. I've been asked if I would ever wear that dress again, maybe for my wedding to Jonathan if we decide to marry. The answer is no. That dress belongs to a different woman who believed different things about love and trust. When Jonathan and I get married, I'll wear a new dress, one chosen by the woman I became instead of the woman I used to be. And our wedding will be a celebration of genuine love between two people who have nothing to hide from each other. That's worth more than any amount of revenge could ever be.